Welcome to Blockchain Explained, the podcast about opportunities, challenges, and trends in blockchain technology. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, a developer, or just crypto curious, this podcast is for you. It features industry leaders and government officials discussing the world of distributed ledgers, cryptocurrencies, and the metaverse. And now, here are your hosts, Alan Rechtschaffen and Kelly Wicker.
Welcome back to another episode of Blockchain Explained. I'm Kelly Wicker, Director of the Science and Technology Innovation Program at the Wilson Center, home to the Digital Assets Forum. In this month's episode, we wanted to share key takeaways from a recent virtual briefing led by my podcast co-host, Alan Rechtschaffen, who is a Wilson Center trustee, chair of the Digital Assets Forum, and a New York University lecturer of law. Alan specializes in fiscal policy, and he leverages this experience in this briefing to unpack President Trump's executive order on financial innovation and cryptocurrency, and the impact that he anticipates it will have on the blockchain and cryptocurrency industries. In short, Alan is heartened that the order seems to signal a shift in American governance of cryptocurrency to reflect some of Bitcoin's basic principles of transparency, decentralization, and financial freedom. Listen now for his walkthrough of the order, and check out the full briefing on the Wilson Center website if you'd like to hear his review of blockchain basics to underpin this analysis and the Q&A from the session. Enjoy.
So now we needed to understand all that to understand why President Trump's executive order is quite powerful for cryptocurrency and digital assets. And he has some simple goals for the technology of cryptocurrency, for the technology of blockchain that he wants to advance in issuing this executive order. And those goals are the following: to foster innovation and economic growth. He wants to support the responsible growth of digital assets and blockchain development. He also wants blockchain to not be censored. He wants people not to be able to say that you can't limit what is put onto a blockchain. He wants to use stable coins as a means of strengthening the US dollar. And he wants to ensure fair banking access for people who are in the business of cryptocurrencies or blockchain. And super important, and this is something that people were excited about when President Biden came out with an executive order on cryptocurrency, which we'll look at that briefly and just see what the difference between the two and how monumental a change it really is in President Trump's executive order. But to have regulatory clarity, to understand what these things are, because our regulatory system is really a hodgepodge of financial crises and events and bad actors that were dealt with new legislation. And because of that, we have multiple federal agencies with some overlapping authority in terms of their regulatory authority. And this was true when derivatives were the topic of conversation, is that people couldn't really understand who had proper regulatory authority. There was an important case of SEC versus Ripple, where the question was, are certain cryptocurrencies a security? Securities there's a laundry list for what is a security in the Securities Exchange Act, but there was no clarity as to whether or not these cryptocurrencies were securities. There are certain tests, there's something called the Howey test, to be able to figure out if they can fit into that, if we can shoehorn it into the laundry list of what a security is, but there was no specific regulatory clarity as to who would regulate cryptocurrencies. If it's a commodity, maybe it's the CFTC. If it's a security, maybe it's the SEC. So that is a key focus of the president's executive order, is to provide that regulatory clarity. And one of the biggest things that he did in his executive order is President Trump said that he was going to ban central bank digital currencies and prohibit central bank digital currencies in order to protect financial freedom and privacy. Central bank digital currencies are cryptocurrencies that are issued by central banks. And this is why it was so important to go through that whole story of the YAP and all that stuff, because it in and of itself is somewhat oxymoric to have a central bank digital currency that is a cryptocurrency on a blockchain. Because if it's centralized, it's no longer the essence of what cryptocurrency was designed for. The whole essence of cryptocurrency was designed in order to allow for the ledger to be distributed among multiple people without having to trust one entity to keep the records or to keep things private or to protect your financial freedom in your spending habits. For instance, if you had a central bank digital currency and all our money was controlled directly by a central bank, I won't say the Federal Reserve, but any central bank, then that central bank, even if they use a ledger that's one or two nodes as opposed to hundreds of people, and they're in control of it, they would actually have the power to shut your money off. It's not like you could take $100 bill and go buy something. If the central bank actually controls the money, controls the ledger, they can flip a switch and actually control your spending. They also will know every single movement of every dollar will be known by the central bank. Now, if this is in the hands of private entities, they might know that information also, but at least you've made the choice of which private entity has that information as opposed to that information being shared only with the central authority. One of the biggest central bank digital currencies in the world right now is the digital yuan. And the digital yuan, all the information about spending is collected by the central authority because they are in control of their digital currency. Now, one of the things on the president's list of things that he focuses on is this idea of ensure fair bank access. The reason that is in the executive order, and there was I'm sorry, I didn't have a chance to watch the beginning of the subcommittee hearing today. There was a subcommittee hearing today, actually, on Operation Choke Point 2.0, the Biden administration's efforts to put crypto in the crosshairs. That there is an idea that the Justice Department had put pressure on financial institutions to limit access to banking systems for certain industries. That was Operation Choke Point, the first iteration. With cryptocurrency, a similar idea has been floated that people who were in the cryptocurrency business could not be banked, that there was pressure from the federal government to debank people in the cryptocurrency business. So if I came up with 2 stablecoin patents and that was my business, it would be very tough for me to open a bank account. Or at least that's what Congress, that's what this committee is investigating. It held a hearing on today at 2 o'clock, and you can watch that hearing later, and that's not going to be the end of that story, but that's because of this idea in the president's executive order of ensuring fair banking access. I do want to point out just one more moment here when we talk about the general concepts of President Trump's executive order is that it's really designed to grow the cryptocurrency business, to grow blockchain. And in order to do that, he, as part of his executive order, revoked the executive order of President Biden on the same topic on digital assets. Executive Order 14067 was revoked by President Trump in issuing this executive order. And you can see that in the goals of President Biden's executive order were very different than President Trump's. And that's why this represents such a monumental change for digital assets that President Trump has created in issuing this executive order. President Biden's executive order was focused on protecting consumers and investors, to the creation of and exploring the creation of a central bank digital currency. The idea of combating illicit finance and national security risks. In some ways, if you look at it, President Biden's executive order was dealing with a different time in the history of the evolution of cryptocurrency as well. but it is a very different focus. It is a much more defensive position to protect as opposed to a growth position in the executive order that President Trump issued, not necessarily for any other reason, but the market has matured. But I think what we'll find is when we look at the details of the executive order beyond what we've discussed already, it really is a return to the essence of what cryptocurrency was to start. It's sort of, a back to the future type thing. Because what we have here is, under President Trump, we have this idea that we are going to create a system where people have real choices in how their money works, in what their money is. And this is sort of the history of digital assets and executive orders. We have the original executive order from President Biden in 2022. We have the new executive order, which got rid of that and the Treasury framework associated with it. And then there's a timeline for the recommendations that are going to come out of the agencies that are listed in the executive order of 30 days for each of the agencies to review the policies of the agencies in order to determine what policies are consistent with the president's executive order and his goals for broadening the technology of cryptocurrency, blockchain, and digital assets. After the 30-day agency review, there's going 60 days, and in 60 days on March 24th, and my dates might be off because I calculated them, so I think these days are right based on a January 23rd issuance. I think it's March 24th, but please double check that. In 60 days, there will be recommendations made to the President's Working Group on Digital Assets, and then a final report will be issued by the President's Working Group on Digital Assets. Now, the President's Working Group on Digital Assets, which is established by the executive order, it has certain goals: regulatory clarity and stability, to preserve financial sovereignty, and to encourage stablecoins, dollar-backed stablecoins, as opposed to CBDCs. So allowing private entities to issue dollar-backed coins as opposed to a central authority like the Federal Reserve issuing a dollar-backed coin. The President's Working Group has a goal of offering fair and open financial access to ensure that crypto businesses and users have fair banking access, that there's consumer protection, that there's a national digital asset strategy, that enables the United States to become the global leader in blockchain. Now, once more, I mentioned that just on this island of Yap, since all a blockchain really is, all this technology really is a storage system, it really is like a huge supercomputer where you could have social media sites that are operating on a blockchain. And what the goal of the President's Working Group on Digital Assets Markets is designed to do is to help the United States become the global leader in blockchain technology. One other thing that has gotten a lot of attention, and there's been some talk of a sovereign wealth fund and how that fits into this, is the idea of a national crypto reserve, whether it goes beyond or where it starts out with the money that has been confiscated from people who did bad stuff with Bitcoin in the past that's been taken over by the government, using that as part of the global reserve, the reserve of the United States Treasury, stockpiling of seized digital assets as a means of having something that is an asset of the U.S. government, focusing on increasing the assets of the government by utilizing this technology, the blockchain.
Alan, before we move forward,
Sure.
that seems like a good part to ask one of the questions that popped up.
Sure.
You were talking about supporting dollar-backed stablecoins. Someone asked, there are many different stablecoins and more being created. Is it necessary to have multiple stablecoins, and why?
That's a great question. So I think that from President Trump's perspective, the reason it is necessary to have multiple stablecoins is you want to give people the freedom to choose. He focuses a lot, and when you read this, it is a document that is very similar, by the way, to the original Bitcoin proponents, where it's very focused on financial freedom and choice. And by having multiple issuers of stable coins, you are no longer forced or pigeonholed into using one stable coin issuer. So now, by having multiple ones, perhaps you don't want one company to know information about you, but you don't mind if a different company has that information. So I think that that is one of the big reasons why the president is a proponent of multiple stable coins, and that having a handful is not enough, because you want to offer the people the choice to be able to not centralize the financial information that is associated with your spending habits. The working group is going to be made up of a special advisor for AI and crypto, whose name is David Sack. He is. It's interesting that the technologies of AI and crypto, and we actually have a Blockchain Explained episode where we talk about this. There's some synthesis and some convergence of these two technologies, because as I told you, one of the things that we talked about is on the island of Yap, you could make rules for the moving of money. Well, you could have artificial intelligence come up with those rules. So there's some synthesis of these two concepts also. But both of these technologies represent major new technologies that are game changers. When they talk about Web 3.0 being built on the blockchain, that is a game changer where information is no longer held on one big server, but is spread out among multiple ledgers that people are holding. The members of the President's Working Group on Digital Assets are the Department of the Treasury, the Department of Justice, Securities Exchange Commission, the CFTC, the Department of Commerce, Department of Homeland Security, the Office of Management and Budget, the National Security Council. And you'll note, glaringly absent from the list is the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve had been working and had many projects going in the area of CBDCs. They weren't about to issue one necessarily, but they were testing them, they were investigating them, they were doing projects with MIT. They were very far along in looking at the idea of issuing CBDCs, and they're not even sitting on the President's Working Group on Digital Assets. And you see here what each of these departments, I put a little summary of what the type of things that they will be looking at. Each of these departments has to review their internal protocols and procedures, their rules, to determine if they are in line with the president's executive order. So the Treasury will review stablecoins and banking access. The Department of Justice will look at financial crimes and forfeitures. SEC will determine which assets are securities. CFTC will, and they'll make recommendations on that timeline we described of 30 days of analysis and ultimately 60 days of recommendations and 180 days for a final report. And there will be like a policy analysis flow chart where they'll start the analysis, they'll look, is the regulation in the scope of the executive order? If it is, then you continue the analysis. If it's out of scope, then the agency will document the reason that it's out of scope of the analysis, and it will continue on. And once you look at the regulation of each of these agencies is tasked with looking at their policies. If it's fully aligned, they'll keep and they'll keep those policies and they'll identify them for the working group. And if not, if it's partially aligned, they'll see if it can be modified. And if it can be modified, they'll identify, proposed changes. And if it conflicts with the core mandates, then they will either have to resend them or escalate it internally to figure out how to make it in line the regulations that are relevant to the executive order to fall into line with President Trump's executive order on financial technology. In terms of President Trump's support of stablecoins, and this is something we brought up before, the reason he is supporting the stablecoins, I told you why the idea of having multiple stablecoins is very much related to this opposition to a U.S. CBDC, very much in opposition to having a centralized authority controlling the money. But he does encourage the idea of global adoptions of stablecoins, which are representative cryptocurrencies that represent dollars. Like the island of Yap, if they have that data entry and it says this data entry doesn't represent a percentage interest in the raw stone, but it actually represents a single dollar, which is held in a bank. And so the whole idea is that stable coins equal a stronger dollar, because that'll make people use the dollar more globally, because there are technological advantages of having things be in the form of a digital currency. But it will protect financial freedom by not allowing a central authority to control the currency. He specifically bans CBDCs. He prohibits the creation and use of a U.S. CBDC. He prevents the Federal Reserve or any agency for issuing a central bank digital currency. He ensures that there'll be no government-controlled digital money. And he says he's doing this because he wants to protect financial privacy and freedom. He wants to strengthen private sector innovation. And one of the other things, in answer to the question from before, one of the other things that issuing stablecoin does is it allows for, remember, we can have these smart contracts built into the blockchain that make rules for how money moves or how a financial transaction happens. Rules that used to be done manually or had to be done by a central authority can be programmed in to a stable coin. And so it will strengthen private sector innovation by having the people on the island of Yap have new rules built into their ledger system. And the whole idea is that by strengthening the concept of stablecoins, President Trump hopes to strengthen U.S. economic sovereignty and the strength of the dollar around the world. Now there was a lot of competition here. 134 countries. I'm sorry I didn't put the source for this information, and so if it's wrong, I apologize. I'm pretty sure this is accurate. I don't have the source of these numbers, but I'm pretty. It's based on reliable sources. But 134 countries are exploring CBDCs. 66 countries are in development pilots or launching them. Chinese digital yuan has 7 trillion yuan that have been issued. There's a Euro central bank. And the U.S. now has banned a CBDC development under President Trump's executive order. And this has taken the Federal Reserve's multiple efforts in CBDCs and just ripped it up and said that it is no longer relevant. So what I think is most important, and that's why I started with a description of the nature of this technology and the nature of Satoshi Nakamoto's vision for Bitcoin, and how this actually started as an idea of not wanting somebody who is in City Hall controlling your money. What it really is, and you see in this executive order, and if you focus on this as you see, if you're at a government agency, or if you're looking at how government agencies are looking at this, what this is really designed to do is to go back to the original vision of what cryptocurrency was all about. What Satoshi Nakamoto really saw as the basics and the founding principles of cryptocurrency and of blockchain technology: financial freedom, decentralization, permissionless innovation.
I hope you enjoyed hearing the meat of our recent briefing on the executive order on financial innovation, and that you learned a little bit about how this administration's approach to crypto is a shift from previous administrations, and hopefully a shift towards the basic principles that Bitcoin was founded on. If you enjoyed this, listen to the full recording on our website. And we'll be back with more episodes recapping the latest in blockchain and crypto and exploring interesting use cases. We'll see you next time on Blockchain Explained.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Blockchain Explained. Please note, nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Want more clear-eyed analysis of this exciting technology? Search for Digital Assets Forum at the Wilson Center for research, event recordings, and more. Want to ask our hosts a question? Write to STIP, S-T-I-P, at wilsoncenter.org with your thoughts. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Blockchain Explained.